So yeah, I was just at the park and there are all these little like middle school kids, probably 12, 13, 14 years old. And it's just like a whole mob of these little kids. I was there working out at the park and half of them were like smoking weed. Um, and like they're posturing around like young kids generally do in that age when you're going through puberty and it's a lot of hostility and a lot of like infighting going on amongst these little clans of little middle school kids. And they're smoking weed and they're all like half of them have bikes and that's like this new trend. I don't know if it's just in Miami or it's other parts of the country and the world, but apparently now having your own bike is like the substitute for having your own fucking car. And they ride around the neighborhoods in their little cliques, in their stupid bikes, and they're all apparently they do that stupid pop a wheelie shit where you pop your front wheel up and you fucking ride around on the back wheel, and like they all do it. So that's like this posturing, almost like tribal mentality where it's all about showing off. Like I remember I was riding bike like 2 years ago, my little fucking nerdy cyclist bike, my professional cyclist bike with thin wheels and aerodynamic and cost $600 something dollars. Meanwhile, these dudes' bikes probably cost 120 at fucking Walmart. My bike being explicitly for hardcore exercise, their bikes being for traveling from home to the park so they can meet up with their stupid homies and smoke pot. And the little kid was like, "Bike life, man, bike life." And I was just like, "Oh yeah, man, yeah, homie, yeah, bike life." It's just like, so it's like this tribalistic mentality. And I was trying to it just occurred to me while I was working out the park. I'm like, why do kids at this age, when they're going through puberty at this age, why do they behave this way so often? What is up with all the posturing, the tribalism, and the kind of primitive behaviors? Owning bikes, like, that's like some kind of statement of your maturity because you have your own little transportation thing. Yet there's still licenses. You still need a license if you ever want to drive a car. And society puts a limit on when you can become mature and adult enough to drive a car around. Even though fucking 150 years ago, I think it was Benjamin Franklin. That might have been more than 150 years ago. Edison, like a lot of these people, like, you could be 12 years old back then and you're running a fucking company at 12 years old. And that's like normal back then. And then people say, "Oh, what are you calling for? Going back to, child slave labor?" Not child slave labor. But couldn't you argue that stuffing kids into these fucking school classroom prisons is its own form of child labor? It's certainly mental. It might not be physical labor, slave labor, but it's definitely mental, intellectual slave labor. Dosing all these kids up on ADHD medication because they can't sit still. Now they got these little ADHD toys. They're called fidget spinners. It's something to keep their fucking minds occupied, something they can play with in their fingers, on their hands, to keep their minds occupied because they're so fidgety. So this idea that, taking kids out of factories and putting them into school factories is so much better, that's questionable. And I'm not saying we should go back to slave labor. Of course not. Anybody who'd think that, you're just projecting your own negative intentions onto children, onto what I'm saying. Don't be such a insensitive, like uncompassionate freak. What I'm saying though is, I think there's value in teaching responsibility and maturity to kids at an early age. But I think a lot of parents, they infantilize their children. They want to artificially extend their children's life, their adolescence, artificially extend the adolescence, because a lot of parents, they get a sense of purpose and self-esteem from their children. And deep down, a lot of these parents, they don't want their children to leave the nest. They don't want little Jimmy to grow up and leave the nest. Because the parent gave birth to little Jimmy. The mom and the dad came together to conceive little Jimmy because the mom and the dad didn't really feel like they had a purpose in their lives for themselves individually. So they had a kid to fill the void of purposelessness. And now their self-esteem is tied into their kids. That's why parents drive around with the fucking, "My son got straight A's in his elementary school class, bumper stickers. It's like a badge of honor that the parents wear on their cars to show off to people. I know I'm channeling what's that comedian's name, man? God damn it, how could I forget his name? Do you know his name, Precious?
I have no idea.
Fucking, what's that guy's name? George Carlin. Is that his? George Carlin, I think his name is. And, I know I'm channeling some George Carlin here, but the point is, so yeah, I think a lot of parents don't want their kids to grow up, and I think sometimes, I'm at the park working out, and I see these kids, it's almost like, I wonder if the reason they behave like this, I wonder if part of it is almost like a rebelliousness against their parents, and against a society that artificially imposes immaturity on them. You can argue, where does it begin? Does the government begin it? Does it begin with government putting on laws that say, oh, you can't drive a car until you're fucking 16 or 17? I mean, let's be real. If there are laws on the books that say that you cannot become mobily independent, meaning you can't have the freedom and independence to drive around wherever you want, to go places. You can't have it until you're 16 or 17 years old. Doesn't that squash the ambition of some kids who might want the freedom to travel around? And people say, well, what do kids have to do at the age of 12, 13, 14, 15? They got nothing to do, so where would they be driving? Well, maybe they got nothing to do because they're culturally conditioned to just sit at home and play video games all day. Oh, God, I know I said video games. No, I'm not saying video games are evil. It's just an example. If you play video games, I'm not condemning you. I play them sometimes, too. I'm not trashing video games. Just a disclaimer, because I know that some people who play video games, not all, but some, they defend their fucking video games like it's, their whole life. Maybe because it is their whole life. But that's a separate topic. So, yeah, I just feel like, so yes, so maybe we're culturally conditioning children that they have to be children longer than they should be children. And again, I go back to the Edison or Benjamin Franklin example. I don't remember what it was. And some of these dudes at the age of 12, they're already fucking, adulthood and maturity used to come much sooner than it comes today. Nowadays, you can be 25 years old. And it's totally normal and socially acceptable to still be living with your parents. I'm not trashing anybody who's that age and lives with their parents. When I was 25 years old, I think I still live with my parents. And there was a period where I was living in my own apartment, but there was also a period around the age of 25 where I was still living with my parents. I don't live with them now, but... So... I think that, maybe that could explain some of this behavior, some of this rebellious behavior. And I wonder what the effects are of, artificially extending childhood. I wonder what that has on children. And I don't think that our society goes out of its way to promote individualism, independence, and adulthood to kids and teenagers as early as possible. We have preset age numbers that dictate when you're mature enough. And, people might say, oh, but it's just human nature. By the age of 16, that's when you're officially sanctioned. And, generally speaking, that's when people mature enough. Is it really? We're put into these school systems where the primary distinguishing factor of the students you're with is age. We segregate people based on age. We have these systems in place. School system is a big part of it. That dictates when we can move forward. And it dictates the standards we set on when we can move forward. What we should be doing with our lives. So between parents, how they raise their kids, and school systems, what they encourage children to do, government laws that restrict what a fucking adolescent teenager can do in terms of just one example, driving around. And then you have these kids who are, smoking weed at the park and You know, they got their little bikes. And I almost sense like the impression I got looking at them during my workout was like they're trying to be adults within the confines of society's limitations on how adult they can be. So it's almost like they want to be independent. They're riding around with their bikes. They're trying to go places and do things. All right? But they can't really do anything because they're conditioned not to do it. Parents don't encourage or raise them to do it at an earlier age. Parents probably shame the kids if they do certain behaviors, if they act certain ways, if you know, subliminal shaming, really. Oh, you have to make me proud, son. And how convenient that the only way that you'll make your parent proud is if you go through the predetermined school system that dictates, you know, what it means to be an adult and at what age you generally could and should graduate school from. And of course, I would argue that for a lot of these, you know, these parents, school is like a way to, it's almost like a way to create artificial success for their children. You know, you could argue that going to school isn't necessarily the formula for success. I mean, a lot of people would argue that nowadays. In fact, going to school and doing what you're told is really just training you to be a blind and obedient slave. It might train you to be a good worker, to go work for someone else, but it's not going to train you to start your own business. It's not going to train you to necessarily have a sense of infinite possibility. There's nothing wrong with going to work for somebody else. There's nothing wrong with choosing not to start your own business. But I guess my point is that, yeah, I think that, you know, for some parents, putting their children in school is a way to get a sense of that pride because they lack purpose, fill that void of purposelessness by attaching themselves to the quote accomplishments of their children. But of course, how convenient is it that the accomplishments within the school system is turning your children into addled, intellectually handicapped, handicapped in terms of their sense of ambition for life, grading and judging them on their capacity to follow orders, which is behavioral training. And then there's the intellectual aspect that trains kids to be mental slaves. I mean, grading them on the capacity to follow orders trains them to be behavioral slaves. Excuse me. It trains them to be slaves in terms of how they behave, in terms of subservience to authority, but also grading children on their capacity to mindlessly regurgitate what some other genius came up with 200 years ago. That's intellectual slavery. That trains them to be intellectually subservient, because it doesn't really train and encourage and incentivize independent thought. It incentivizes groupthink. It incentivizes regurgitation. It incentivizes, some other smart person 200 years ago discovered this. Let me remember what he did. That's what you're being graded on in school. Regurgitation. That's really the only standard that you're judged by, or at least the primary one. So sometimes I wonder if the rebelliousness you see that children have is sort of a conflict between a natural desire to want to become a grown-up, independent adult, clashing with parents, society, and government as a whole, telling children they can't be adults until a certain age. And so they have this kind of infantilized pseudo-adulthood, where it's like a squandered adulthood, where their version of being independent and being adults is, fuck, I just got out of class at 3:30 p.m., stuck in school all day, fucking miserable there, gotta do it because my parents say I gotta do it. Now I get to be an adult now. Now I get to choose my own destiny for a few hours after school. Now I'm free. And of course, their version of freedom is, riding around in little bikes, their version of a car, acting in almost like you're being independent, but they're not really being independent. Going to the park, smoking weed because it's a rebellious thing to do. Notice it's a desire to be rebellious. And just, just behaving in ways that sometimes I wonder if this type of behavior that you see a lot of times amongst like these puberty age middle schoolers, young high schoolers is just a clash between two opposing values. Yeah. You have any thoughts on that? 15-minute rant?
I was just listening.
Alright. So you have nothing else to add?
I'm honestly just listening. Sorry.
You're just soaking it all in?
Yeah.
Alright. Well...
That was a good rant.
I know, it was a good rant. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed that rant, and you'd like to bypass the YouTube ad boycott that, believe it or not, cut my ad revenue by 75%. I know, it's not hype. The ad boycott is serious. The politically correct mainstream media is coming for the alternative media. Little old me just lying down on my futon here, ranting into a webcam with no makeup and teleprompter. They can't compete with this. They can't. So they have to shut us down. And how are they doing it? They're using political correctness. They're using the PC ad paradigm of I'm reliant on ads to fund the content that I do, and saying all corporations have to be opposed to politically incorrect content, because if the ads that are running on a show, if that show has politically incorrect content, excuse the cough, then how would these corporations make tons of money if a politically incorrect program is inevitably going to polarize certain viewers? It's going to piss off certain viewers. If you have a show on TV and you say, yeah, Islamic extremism is a problem. This idea that, the Islamic patriarchy is somehow compatible with feminism, if you say that's a problem, you might offend certain Muslims. And the Muslims might say, hey, corporation that's running ads on this show, this politically incorrect show, how dare you run ads there? We're going to boycott your product. So the corporations just say, stop saying politically incorrect stuff, and because the show relies on the corporation's ads to make money to fund the shows have to conform. And that basically describes the entire TV and radio and newspaper industries for the past few decades. They were politically correct, not because they cared about minorities or not being racist. It's because that's how they maximize dollars for themselves, by appeasing their corporate ad masters. So they're trying to take that dependency on corporate ad masters, and through the Wall Street Journal adpocalypse here on YouTube, they're trying to defund and demonetize independent creators, independent voices that can just sit here without a teleprompter, without makeup, and just speak their fucking mind in passion-driven rants, which you love and enjoy. People love them and enjoy them. They can't compete with that, so they're trying to shut it. See, this would never be allowed on your local news show. Some dude coughing, they'd never allow. They'd be like, cut the camera, cut it off, cut to commercials. Oh man, it's fucking hilarious. You should see, man, when I watch local news now, I'm like, who are these robots in front of these cameras? They're just like, hi. They're so plastic and they might as well just put robots there, and no one would know the difference. So, and I notice how lately the local news, they try to humanize their reporters. So, like, they have these little things, like between segments, they'll give like two like seemingly personal comments on the story. Like, they came up with those comments, like, oh wow, that's interesting, and they giggle. It's like, bro, that's on the teleprompter. There's like in parentheses on the teleprompter says, now turn to co-host, co-anchor, giggle, and comment, give a bland comment on the story. Anyways, so yes, that's what's going on. And so what's happening is that now the only way to beat the corporate ad masters of political correctness is for, instead of content creators like myself and others being beholden to corporate ad sponsors, corporations and their ads, we need to become dependent on you, the viewer. You have to be the one who takes fan funding into your own hands. You have to be the one that chooses the content you believe in, the values you agree with, and you have to choose who you want to support, and you have to do it yourself. I know it's a more active role, but hey, that's fun, right? Because that means you're actively shaping the media of the future. And you can bypass the politically correct paradigm that is extremely dangerous. It really is. That's all I gotta say, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed my video, check out my Trigger shirts, Trump 2020 shirts. Check out my Patreon. If you buy a shirt, if you support me on Patreon, these are ways for you to directly determine the fate of the media going into the future. And it allows me to no longer be beholden to the corporation ad machine paradigm of political correctness. So thank you guys for watching. Links are below and above.
Fight back against YouTube censorship by supporting me on Patreon. You'll also get access to exclusive, never-before-seen videos and other perks like monthly Google Hangouts with me, free books and t-shirts, and more.
But not everybody's like that. What should the country do about gun owners or gun buyers?
So he shoots this gun a couple of times, and he's like, the concussion, the smell of it all, it was so overwhelming. I had post-traumatic stress.
Triggered by the Second Amendment? Well, too bad. Trigger some snowflakes with my brand new Triggered t-shirts. Now available. Just click the card above or the link below to get it now.